Ian, thank you so much for accepting the interview. It's a pleasure to me to talk to you.
Yes.
I would like to know when and why did you start to study the endocannabinoid system and the cannabinoids?
Well, I've been studying cannabinoids, I think, since the mid-90s. The time has gone by very quickly. The one thing that has changed a lot is that in the early days, you could only really get research funding to show that cannabis was bad. So for many years, I was funded to do studies that was basically about the harmful effects of cannabinoids on the brain and how to stop people getting addicted to cannabis. So this was probably the theme for the first 10 or 15 years of my study of the cannabinoid system. And everything has kind of gone through 180 degrees. It's all completely shifted now, where we're looking much more at the benefits of cannabinoids and how dysregulation of the endocannabinoid system can be very important in various diseases. And also we've learned so much more about the plant itself, which gives us a kind of special repository of compounds that may be useful for all sorts of therapeutics.
How is the state of medical cannabis in Australia?
So in Australia, it's a time of dynamic changes. So traditionally, cannabis has been illegal in Australia. Cannabis has led the world in recreational cannabis consumption. For many years, we consumed the most cannabis of any country in the world. And I think things have changed since probably 2015, and that's due to public pressure on the government saying that if people need cannabis to help them with a severe medical condition, then it should be made available. And the government has brought in legislation that allows patients access to medicinal cannabis. So there's all these really important issues that need to be addressed, but the good thing about Australia is that there's been a lot of change just in the last 2 years, and I think the pace of change will continue. The other remaining hurdle, I think, is to bring the medical profession on side, because doctors are a little bit worried about cannabis, and many of them don't know how to prescribe. They have all their patients coming in and asking about it, particularly people with chronic pain and chronic mental health conditions, but they haven't learned at medical school how to prescribe it safely and how to deal with patient inquiries. So doctor education is a really important issue in Australia at the moment.
And the government is supporting that for doctors? How is it?
They are. We have a health minister who's actually very positive about driving change, and he realizes that if 90% of Australians want medicinal cannabis to be available, the government should really do everything they can to facilitate that. So we just worked with several hundred Australian GPs and surveyed them about their attitudes and their knowledge of medicinal cannabis, and a majority were very supportive of medicinal cannabis.
Amazing. So are you researching something specific?
Well, it's all sorts of different things. So, for example, we're interested in agriculture, so we do a bit in plant genetics, we do extraction, we do medicinal chemistry, so we sometimes synthesize cannabinoids in the laboratory. We have animal models of disease, we have epileptic mice, we have mice that are addicted to methamphetamine, we have models of things like PTSD and anxiety, and probably our primary focus is epilepsy with the preclinical work. And then we have a whole range of human research going on as well, so we have early stage psychopharmacology trials. We're doing work on driving ability, for example. And then there's several large clinical trials in Australia that we're involved in as well. So there's a study of vaporized cannabis in palliative care. There's a study with chemotherapy, just nausea and vomiting, pediatric epilepsy, and we're launching our own trials in alcohol addiction, in anorexia nervosa, and trials in cancer and dementia as well. So there's a wide range of activity. There's a lot going on, and help address a lot of gaps in the literature. As you know, the evidence base for cannabis is very patchy, and so we really are trying to focus our efforts where there's a real opportunity to show that cannabinoid therapeutics will have a positive effect.
Where do you see the place of cannabinoids-based treatments in the mainstream medicine in the future?
I think that's a very interesting question, gazing into the future, because the pace of change has been enormous in the last 10 or 20 years in this particular area. And there's a variety of attitudes about how the future will look. On one hand, we have people who are very passionate about the plant, but at the same time, on the other side, you've got a pharmaceutical model. I think both things in a way are valid. I think the plant is fascinating because you've got 120 cannabinoids in there, and we only know about 10 of them. At the same time, we're not frightened to take a pharmaceutical approach if necessary. So, if you want to produce CBD, it's actually quite simple to do that in the lab. You can, it's a fairly simple chemical reaction, so you can produce kilograms of CBD using a chemistry approach rather than having to grow the plants and under secure conditions and then extract the CBD and purify it, which can take months and months and months. So I think it's good to develop both approaches, and both things will probably be true. I think there will always be human beings that use cannabis, just as they have done for tens of thousands of years. That won't end anytime soon. But as we learn more and more about the plant and its effects on the brain and the body, then there'll be opportunities to take elements of that plant and purify them and use them as pharmaceuticals. And as we learn about the endocannabinoid system, we learn about all these other targets as well. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.